Hello. Let's see. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you happen to be watching this. For me, it is February 27th, 2021. That is a Saturday. It is 13:30, 1:30 in the afternoon here in Seattle. Here in, actually, surprisingly sunny Seattle. What am I doing inside on a sunny Saturday? It's a good question. So we're here to do another XUnit.NET v3 live stream. We are, as always, going to start off with a little bit of review of everything that's going on. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Let me pop up the browser. This is our discussions. So let's go ahead and pop all three of these open, and we'll see what's new on the discussion side. I'd like to know why the collection class is marked as sealed. This prevents us from creating a custom attribute needs DB context instead of collection needs DB context. An excellent question. Collection attribute. All right, so that is sealed. So what are our references to the collection attributes? They come from let's see, they come from the collection factory. So they're used by the collection factory. Assembly, collection per class, needs. Okay, that's just in the XML doc comments then. So these factories are, let's see, they're given an I test assembly. Collection attributes, test list, get the collection attributes. I feel like they should be used in discovery as well. Collection per assembly, collection per class. Collection behavior. Why do we not have any references to these in any tests? Like, I feel like I can't believe that. We don't use collection attribute anywhere in any of our tests? Collection per assembly factory. So a test collection factory, given a type info, has to get a test collection. Okay, well that's really the thing that we're looking for to answer this question. So let's go over here to the source and go look at XUnit test collection factory. And take that as a permalink. The answer is source-based discovery. The API that consumes collection attribute does so via, let's see, actually I should be looking in v2. So I want XUnit test collection factory, but I want the v2 version. So let me go here. Right, you're going to 404, that's fine. I want you on v2. I want XUnit test collection factory. There we go, that's a better permalink. Consumes it, is done so via type info, which may or may not represent compiled code. Can represent an AST, abstract syntax tree, over source code inside of a text editor. Yeah. Let's see. The API that consumes collection attributes does so via iType info. So it's probably not here, right? That's going to be in abstractions. iType info. So that's going to be here in abstractions. Why I keep alt tabbing. Does so via iType info. As such, you'll find that all of our attributes that are intended to be consumed this way must be sealed, because we must be able to discern their intent simply by inspecting the source code. Oh, I forgot to start playing my music. If I don't do that, we're going to get the headset will turn itself off in 15 minutes. And that is way too loud. Okay. The way we do so is by looking at the constructor arguments in the source code. Unfortunately, there's no extensibility mechanism to make what you want simpler at this time. So that's that. Okay, call constructor for collection only once. I'm using collection fixture, shared DB context across multiple test classes. Chance to call the constructor of a test class only once instead of x times, where x is the number of tests when using collection fixture. Unfortunately, no. This is an important design part of xunit.net for isolation that ensures that each test is given a fresh environment, aka a new instance of the test class. Need to accomplish the following. Create and initialize a database within collection fixture, DB template. Create a DB copy per test class by copying a DB template. For this, I need to call the constructor of the test class exactly once. Off the top of my head, the easiest way to work around this today would be to use the type of the caller. I assume you're calling some method on the context, on the fixture, to do the DB copy per test class work. The simplest workaround today would be to use the type of the caller as a trigger to determine when to run the logic or not. Your get me a new copy of the database operation can basically no op if the caller is the same type as the last caller. This is a database and a collection fixture. Alternatively, you could do this as a class fixture instead of a collection fixture, and then just do the work in the class fixtures constructor, since that will only get called once per test class. But each test class that used it as its class fixture will get a fresh copy of that class, and thus fresh copy of the database. You would still need to put such tests into a collection to prevent parallelization collisions. Of course, if you have parallelization enabled. Okay. That gives you two workarounds. Parameterized tests find and run independently. I have been using XUnit for 2 months now. Come from a PyTest background. I've been trying to parameterize tests using properties set in a class and have to use the following for various types of use case. Yes. Test discovery considers the test as one test and not the amount of objects. Using my code above, the tests do run, but they run in series. It would be extremely beneficial if they ran in parallel. Okay. This is sort of true sometimes. We have a separate concept of test case versus test. And by your description, I'm going to guess you're running these tests in Visual Studio. When that's the case, we need to be able to serialize your theory data All right, let's explain this a little bit more first. A test case results in one or more tests being run, each with an individual result. For facts, there is always a one-to-one mapping between test case and test. For theory tests, there are two situations which could arise. For some situations, you get a one-to-one mapping between test case and test. And in some situations, you get a one-to-many mapping between test case and test, where each row of data is a test case, where the test method is the test case, and each row of data is a test. What determines this sometimes situation? Not to put too fine a point on it, but Visual Studio's Test Explorer. In this case, because of the design of Test Explorer, and the underlying engine really, we need to be able to serialize test cases. If the member data, let's see, if the theory data is not serializable, then we have to fall back to the one-to-many mapping scenario where we can serialize information about the test case, test method itself, and call it a single test case. Versus if we can serialize all the theory data, we can use the one-to-one mapping scenario. I'm kind of curious. I feel like we have docs on this, but I'm not 100% sure. We have theory data stability. Let's throw this back in here as well. There's a documentation page. A documentation page on theory data stability, which is not your exact problem, but does describe the serialization process a bit. That might be useful. Additional background information. By your description, I'm going to guess you're running these tests in Visual Studio. When that's the case, we need to be able to serialize your theory data. Which I'm guessing we cannot. So we fall back to the one-to-many mapping. This means the Visual Studio UI will only show you the... I'm going to do a little example here. Yeah, let's make a new one. New project. XUnit. .NET Core. XUnit Test Project 1, sure. Don't ever show me that. You don't want my feedback. I promise you don't. 241, 243, 16 star. Go away, coverlet. Build. It's going to yell at me about 16 star. It's not good. Theory. Inline data. Let's see. 42. Inline data 2112. Inline data hello world. Object O. Assert not equal 2112 O. Theory. Member data. Name of non-serializable data. Public void test 2, object O. Actually, let's do serializable data and non-serializable data. Let's do it that way instead of inline data. Public static theory data object serializable data New one of those. 42, 2112, hello world. Okay. And then we'll do non-serializable data, which will be the same thing except a new object. Your non-serializable data. And let's do test explorer. We'll go ahead and put you over here. And then we'll build you. Let's try project and class. Okay. So let's start with this as a screenshot. Give me a Windows snip. Here we go. Let's come back to our browser window. Single test method. Here's an example which has a test where all the data is serializable versus not. All right. Okay. You can see that the test with serializable data shows individually runnable and reportable results versus the one that does not. So we'll go ahead and we'll run all. And we're going to pop this up like this. All right, and then we'll do rectangular snip. So here's this. Okay, so there's a runnable and reported as opposed to this, which is runnable and not reportable. Not runnable, not reportable. There we go. Okay. So what can you do to make your data serializable? This is the rule set we use, which basically includes a bunch of intrinsic types plus anything which implements X unit serializable. Which means we need to go over here to hit this. Go find, I want to say it's serialization helper or utility. Oh, I got to be in the right branch. Serialization helper. Yeah, serialization helper, that sounds right. No, that's not it. XUnit serialization info can serialize object. That's what we want. We want that. Supported serialization types. Actually, I guess we want to start there, don't we? Um, it's weird that I don't see. Oh, there it is, right there. I'm like, where's the XUnit serializable? Okay, let's look at this. Okay, so there's our list of what you can serialize. Okay. It has been removed in v3, not yet released, in favor of built-in serialization. Couldn't use built-in serialization at the time. Agit 0 or agito. Let me answer your question in just a second. Couldn't use the built-in serialization at the time because our target platforms didn't all support it. All right, so the other question is, so your question is this situation better with ReSharper and CodeRush? The answer is I honestly don't know. I know for sure that ReSharper and probably also CodeRush have their own custom discovery logic. And so I really don't know how they handle member data, in particular discovery. But my belief is that this serialization problem is unique to Visual Studio. So if they have the ability to enumerate individual data rows already, then they won't have any of these serialization requirements that really come about because of Visual Studio. I feel like my microphone might be a little bit too loud. Move it around a little bit. Okay. So using my code above, the tests do run, but they run in series. This isn't possible today, but it's a feature we're working on for v3. And that's going to be somewhere in here. Our roadmap contains two issues in particular. This and this one. This and this one, and then the roadmap, we'll just go ahead and link here. All right. I feel like that is a extraordinarily complete answer to the question. Okay. So there's that. That is all the discussions, right? Do a quick refresh. Nothing's popped in there. Alexander Ivanov has opened 3 issues related to security and code analysis that I'm going to look at off stream, as well as a pull request. and no PRs here to look at in assertion library. So I think we're done with this part of life. All right, you can go away, you can go away, you can get minimized, and you guys can all go away. Next thing I want to do is talk about what I've done since the last time we got together, which I think was last Saturday. I believe this was probably the last commit from that stream, or I don't know, maybe this one was? Doesn't really matter. There's been a lot of little stuff. Let's see. Yeah, I think this is the first one I want to talk about. So I'm making changes to what we did last week was we made changes to the discovery and executor signatures. And those signatures were really around swapping out the toFind and toRun methods for the find and run methods that are now just on the front controller. And I'm not, yeah. Anyway, so that's what happened here. And so if I look at iFront controller, we can see that we removed one of the finds in favor of a find that takes settings. Those settings allow a filter. And then we also did, so this is all still find. So the rest of that is this. So now if I go to front controller, where I left this was I got rid of the two runs in favor of find and run. So these are all now the three methods, and they sort of match up with the intended usage. If you are a runner author that is going to present UI to the user to say, here's all of your tests, pick the one you want to run, just like the Test Explorer in Visual Studio, you'll use the find method and the run method. Right? You'll use the find method to go find tests and do filtering as appropriate. And then once the user has selected what they want to run, you'll use the front controller run settings to run those tests. If, however, you are an author that immediately just wants to find tests, filter them, and run them immediately, you'll use this single find and run method. And this is really all about performance. So if I come to iFront controller, yeah, so I've made some changes. Hang on, let me stash these changes real quick. So if I come to front controller, all right, so you can see one of the things we merged in the discoverer and the executor, and these things used to be split apart. This stuff was from the discoverer, basically. Metadata about the test framework itself and the test assembly and the ability to find tests. And then the executor had find and run on it. Obviously, you need run abilities. Each one of these has settings. So the find settings is really the test framework discovery options, which has always existed. This was always part of the find operation, but also you can apply filters. And the reason we want to pass filters here now instead of just assuming the runner should run the filters is it would certainly be nice for the test frameworks to be able to receive these filters and run them while doing discovery so that we can dramatically cut down on the amount of communication that happens between the test framework and the runner. If I only have to send back the objects that describe the tests that are going to be run as opposed to all the tests and then letting you filter them, that should save a lot of memory allocations and a lot of time. So the filters now get passed through here. And then for find and run, we have both discovery options because we have to do a discovery phase, and execution options because we're going to do a run phase, and again, filters. So if you want to filter those tests, you can pass this filter list in. We will filter them and then run the filtered list. All right, and then finally for run, this is execution options and then the list of serialized test cases that you want to run. So the assumption here is that you've been given a list of test cases that you want to run, and so you want to run those test cases. You just pass those in. And you need the serialized version of those. We just talked about the serialization problem, right? So the design of Visual Studio sort of mandates that we can't really pass objects around. They have to be a serialization of those objects. And so this is just now a baked-in part of this API. Whereas in the old system, serialize and deserialize were functions of the test framework that you could sort of leverage as a separate operation. So that's the state of front controller today. A lot of stuff, I mean, you can tell by the number of files that had to be changed here, right? A lot of stuff had to be changed to make this work. But in particular, like if we look at console runner, this is a perfectly good example here of a lot of the code we got to get rid of that was doing a discovery phase, right? And then a filtering phase, and then a running phase. And all of that got replaced with a simple call to just now find and run. So, you know, here we got to delete about 30 lines of code, multiply that by 3 or 4, because we have console runner, well, actually, yeah, more like 3. We have console runner here, we have the MS build runner, and we have the test-driven.net runner. They all got to get simplified in this logic. And then the tests need to get restructured, and the test framework abstractions that we give you in runner utility, so to be able to run XUnit v1 tests and XUnit v2 tests, those had to change in order to implement the new front controller pattern, and then like that filtering logic and all that stuff is now moved into these test framework abstractions. In the case of v1 and v2, we're still doing filtering on the runner's side and not in the framework side because we can't really change those frameworks, right? They've already shipped long ago. And so filtering operations aren't anything that they can do. So this is no worse from a performance perspective than it was before, but it is hidden from the runner. And then when we get around to doing v3, we'll be able to do that on the framework side and get those performance savings for v3 tests. The other thing I did was XUnit 2 and XUnit 2 Discover were separate classes that you could new up. And so I have merged those together. So they're now just in the XUnit 2 class. The XUnit 2 class now, if we come look at this, the XUnit 2 class now has just basically 2 public constructors. One that you can use for discovery only. And for that, we need an assembly info. That's our abstraction. So this is how you could do a source-based discovery for XUnit v2. And then we have a constructor for discovery and execution, right? And for that, v2 always required an assembly on disk. So in that case, you're passing an assembly file name, and then we can do what we need to do. So it's a little bit of restructuring. Touched a lot of files, but it also gave me an opportunity to sort of beef up the tests. The tests got quite a bit better here in this change. And then just, 15 minutes ago, I checked this one in, which is the long-lived Marshall by ref object I noticed was sitting in the v2 namespace, but it's being used by both v1 and v2, so I moved it out into the common namespace. No big deal. So after all of that, okay, there's the context of what I'm doing today. Let me go ahead and pop this stash back out, and we'll do a reset. So I decided that after all of that, that maybe I didn't actually want the merged front controller. Maybe I still want the discoverer to be a separate thing. And the reason for that, which by the way, this should look like that. Okay. Um, so the having discovery be an explicit thing that you can just say, hey, I just want to do discovery because I want to be able to do source-based discovery. Like it's an important operation that today the front controller doesn't allow you to do. Today, if you want to do source-based discovery, you have to go and new up XUnit2 discoverer. And the value of front controller is hiding the differences between v1, v2, and v3. Right, so I want to move that behavior out into the front controller so that now you can ask the front controller, hey, I want a version of the framework abstraction that is appropriate for the test that I'm doing, and I only intend to do discovery. And so now we have, again, we've split these back out. There's the metadata about the test framework and the test assembly and the find operation. And then the execution operations, just rather than having an ifront controller executor, I just put them directly into the front controller, which I think is fine. So I'm in the middle of really sort of reworking the front controller to do this. And so this, like literally the only changes I've made at the moment are what you just looked at, which is the grabbing the ifront controller and splitting it off into two interfaces. I did need to make one change here. I don't know why this was an explicit implementation in V1. There wasn't really a whole lot of other explicit implementations in XUnit 1. Actually, while I say that, I'm now wondering if that was actually true. Front controller. So yeah, it just implements ifront controller, but doesn't do any explicit method implementations. I honestly don't know why this was made explicit, but test assembly unique ID. There was an inherit doc here. At some point, this was clearly public, so I just went ahead and made that thing public again. But that's all I've done. I haven't figured out what the actual change to XUnit front controllers API, as it were, will be. So today, to initialize a front controller, you basically just pass me a project assembly and source information provider and a message sink. This is a relatively recent change in terms of this constructor. They used to take a lot more parameters, but we sort of got collapsed down into project assembly. And so project assembly allows, like, you're required to have an assembly, which is clearly not good for source-based discovery, right? That's not right. But front controller historically was about discovery and execution, so yeah, you needed an assembly. You need something that was already compiled. It didn't have to necessarily be on disk, because in V3 we're going to support dynamic assemblies, but it does need to be an assembly. So we need, like, this looks like the constructor for discovery. So like I could change this to be used for both discovery and execution. The other thing is I'm not sure whether I want people to call constructors or whether I want them to call factory methods, because like I want XUnit front controller to be able to return something which says, by the way, I'm only an ifront controller discoverer and not a full front controller. As opposed to when you new this up directly, what you'll have is situations where you may not be able to actually discover, or may not be able to actually run. So that can't actually run anything on, as opposed to what I had to do here, where I make notice of if you new it up with one of these that is a find and run will fail because this is for discovery only. So I'm kind of wondering if I should make this a factory as well and do the exact same pattern. right? I might. Um, but here, for discovery, we need an assembly info, like I said before, but for execution, we need an actual assembly on disk. Um, what would be nice is this should also be able to collapse a bunch of this stuff up into an XUnit project assembly as well. So that would be a nice change here as well. So maybe part of this work is everything becomes factory methods, and then you get back the right interface type as appropriate. Now, if you take an iframework or an ifront controller discover and cast it to an ifront controller, it will work, but we'll still have to throw exceptions like you see here, where if I don't have an executor, then that means this was made for discovery only. So we'll probably do the same thing on the other side. So anyway, that's where we are. That's kind of my intention here. I think factory methods are going to be the way I want this to work. In which case, that basically this becomes this. Or something like it. I don't know. And this is going to be discovery plus execution constructor. And we'll call this, we'll separate these down here, factory methods, public static ifront controller for discovery and execution. All right. Creates a front controller, creates an implementation. How about this? Returns an implementation of ifront controller, which can be used for both discovery and execution. And so those are our parameters. We'll just go ahead and steal those parameters down here. They don't even have default values up here anymore because we're calling them directly. So if I say that, then I want to return a new, well, actually we can lambda this, right? Lambda this, we'll say new XUnit front controller, project assembly, source information provider, and diagnostic message sync. That change alone should be breaking some things because, yeah. For discovery and execution. And I expect us to break tests as well here. But just this change should be fairly straightforward. Await using controller. Yes. So we know that XUnit front controller is async disposable. I think it's probably okay to move that here. Actually, maybe move that here. Right? And that way we allow discoverers and front controller discoverers and front controllers to be async disposable. We sort of require it, really. And that's going to break a couple of things because we probably don't have, well, actually, no, that's okay, I guess. XUnit 2 is already async disposable. That's surprising. Oh, well that's... I had actually kind of broken that and I didn't even realize it when I pulled the interface off of here. X unit 1 is probably already async disposable, so you can just come off of there now. Front controller implies that. Okay. So that means X unit front controller. We have a disposal tracker. We do have a disposal tracker. And when we create yeah, the inner controller, we disposal tracker that as well. Okay. Very good. All right. Here's MS build. MS build needs to do this as well. Whoops. For discovery and execution. I'm really surprised we did not end up breaking any tests, but I guess we don't have explicit front controller tests. It's probably true because it's basically just a pass-through. Like, how do you test this logic? This logic is kind of like, ugh. All right, so that's for discovery and execution. So we're going to need one for discovery as well. We'll just go ahead and put that one here. I don't know what that's going to look like yet. Don't know what its parameters are going to be. We don't know what its implementation is going to be, but we will steal its summary, implementation of I front controller discover, which can be used for test discovery, including source-based test discovery. Call that out as a sort of an explicit design goal here. We don't know what the parameters are yet. That shouldn't break anything, just adding a new method. Curious to make sure we haven't broken any tests. So let's give this a quick run. Visual Studio loves putting in character and line feed, despite the fact the editor config file says don't do that. Having a hard time believing they'll ever fix that bug. Reported that one a long, long time ago. We have now arrived at the Delane portion of our playlist today. If you saw my tweet, told you what I was listening to today was some prog albums from 2020. Colleague of the Source just finished. Delane, Apocalypse, and Chill. Ironically released in February before we were having an apocalypse. Haken, Virus, fantastic. Pineapple Thief, Versions of the Truth, fantastic. Wobbler, Dwellers of the Deep. Pineapple Thief, if you're a Porcupine Tree fan, this feels like a Porcupine Tree album to me. Which is not to denigrate Pineapple Thief, but I mean it's just a fantastic album. I love Porcupine Tree, And Gavin, who is the drummer for Porcupine Tree, is currently playing with Pineapple Thief, so that probably helps. And Wobbler is like like straight up 70s style prog being made today. So there you go. How are our tests coming along? This Delaney album I've listened to 50, 60, 70 times. I don't even know how many times I've listened to this album already this year. Well, last year, I guess. Just fantastic. All right. One of the other things I did recently, I don't know if I highlighted that last time or this time. I'm now running tests with the MS Build Runner, which we hadn't been doing for quite a while. That can only be V1 and V2 tests at this point because, we can't do V3 tests via MS Build Runner yet. That's the general work we're sort of pursuing at the moment. So come back and add that later. All right, so didn't break anything. That to me looks like a reasonable place to commit. Let's take a quick look at the files. So this is our split, and we'll grab that text. And then this is just kind of would like to move to factory methods here as well. I think that'd be nice. I think I'm just gonna take a note. Okay. I don't know if I'll get to that today. Okay, so this is our split. Move X unit front controller to factory methods. All right, so the interesting question is, what does this look like if we're just going to do discovery? So today, the created and controller is the sort of the logic gate for making a decision about exactly which thing we want to do. And since we also need to keep track of um, the whether we're doing discovery or also execution, like this is kind of an interesting part of the problem. Today we do a discovery, a directory enumerate, and trying to discover whether or not you have XUnit execution in your DLL list. I don't know, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I don't know how I'm going to do this in a source-based discovery system. Um, I wonder if I need to change some of the abstractions in order to get assembly references. Hmm. This is actually a real problem. How am I going to do this? So one of the things we could do is ask them to provide a list of assembly references. If you're based on a file system, you can obviously just go look in the directory like we're doing here. Except, of course, you'd have to send us the entire list of DLLs. But if you're in a source-based system, then obviously you would have some access to that list. Like if you were inside of Visual Studio, I'm sure through DTE you would get the list of stuff you were looking for. Yeah, this is not really a trivial problem, is it? All right, I'm going to think about this, and I'm actually going to go do the factory stuff for XUnit 2 right now instead. And I'm going to let this percolate in the back of my head. So both of these degenerate into a call to this private constructor now. So for us, this is a really easy shift. We just move these constructors down here. So instead of this, this is going to be public static front controller discover for discovery. And the text will be returns an implementation of front controller discover, which can be used to discover XUnit.NET v2 tests, including source-based discovery. So we don't do that. We do this instead. Actually, I should have left that here, which is a new XUnit 2. All right. That's pretty straightforward. And then this becomes public static front controller for discovery and execution. And then returns implementation of front controller, which can be used to discover and execute XUnit.NET v2 tests. So then this is new XUnit 2. That's interesting. We have logic here that needs to go. That I think only matters if we have an assembly file name. So we can just move that logic up into this constructor and just look for assembly file name. Because the version for discovery is going to pass null for an assembly file name, right? Let's name some of these parameters. So after config file name, that's shadow copy. So this is assembly info, which will be null. So if I go to this constructor now, only save to project. Okay. Well, there's assembly info. Could not get discoverer. And then what we should be able to do here is basically say if assembly file name is not equal to null, then we can do all of this. If we got an assembly file name, that means we can do execution as well as discovery. So that can come here. Which basically just sets remote executor. Okay. That should break the front controller. So that's for discovery and execution. So now using a factory method here, it becomes really obvious that this method can only be used for execution. Just goes to show that this code is in the wrong place right now. But, you know, we figured that out 15 minutes ago. Oh, yeah. So here's TDNet2. XUnit. Oh, you think this is an XUnit2, but it's really not. You're an front controller. I don't mind calling it a front controller. Okay. And then our XUnit2 acceptance tests, testable XUnit2. I feel like this just needs to go, this needs to become factory method as well. Okay, what's your problem? Can I convert an IFR controller to a testable X unit? That's true. You need to be an IX unit or an I front controller. You don't derive from X unit 2 anymore. Okay. Easy enough. Okay, one more pass through the test gauntlet. As soon as the build there is done, I want to go look at changing the signature of the factory method. It'd be nice to have it match. Is that a requirement? Should it match the XUnit project? kind of feel like it should. Like if I look at the front controller for discovery and execution, like it'd be nice to be able to take those three parameters. That's clearly all we need, because obviously we can use that to manufacture everything else. Alright, so if I were to come into the... Let's mark this one as obsolete. And instead, let's do this, public static I front controller for discovery and execution. Alright, we just need to know how to do this. App domain support is going to be project assembly dot configuration dot app domain or default. Assembly file name is project assembly dot assembly file name. You're going to yell at me because it's nullable? Maybe? Hmm. Yeah, I don't think I can quite do that the way I thought. For the moment, let's do this, but guards for entry conditions. So this is cut that out. This is app domain support. This is assembly file name. Verify assemblies on disk. I just turned the volume up. That's not what I meant to do. Okay, well that's not a very good volume control. Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure about this one yet. This is project assembly file name. Config file name, we only use that once, so we'll do that. Shadow copy is on configuration. Shadow copy or default. Shadow copy folder. And then this, verify assemblies on disk, which assemblies on disk, we'll call that true. Because I think that's what it is here. So if I was to steal these, which by the way, now that I look at that, that's not correctly. Project assembly, we'll just call this test project assembly. Use as default. Visual Studio, source information provider. Diagnostic, yep. Okay. I'm okay with those. We'll steal those as that. xunit.net v2 tests. And then verify assemblies on disk. We'll move you up here. And then this. Alright, you're unhappy about this potentially being null. So what are our guards up here for some of this stuff? Diagnostic message sync will just get caught. We need either an assembly info or an assembly file name. So I feel like if we move these guards out of here, first of all, this was always a very sketchy guard anyway, because it's going to give you the wrong name. Let's move these guards out of here and put them into these. All right, we'll put the guard here as well. So now we can say assembly info can't be null here. Source information provider is allowed to be null here? Is not allowed to be null here? I feel like we could, well, we need to verify it, or we need to pass one in. It's allowed to be null here, so as far as I'm concerned, it should be allowed to be null here as well. And then you can be that. And if you're optional, you get to come down here. Means you should come down here. Source information provider can be null. So if that's true, we'll figure out the right answer for that, which is basically if source information provider is null, then source information provider is a new Visual Studio source information provider, which needs an assembly file name and a diagnostic message sync. Visual Studio source information provider requires an assembly file name. Is that actually true? Why? Why? Because we make app domains off of it. Okay. Assembly file name is null. And source is going to be null source information provider. Otherwise, it's going to be Visual Studio. So in the case of, and that feels really bad because that's really what we wanted is discovery. Put a to-do note here. Need to find a way to get Visual Studio source information provider to not require an assembly on disk. In the meantime, what that means is our for discovery message for source is not null uses which this doesn't need to be that anymore. You have access to that type. All right. So we needed some guard clauses. We'll go fix that in a minute. Actually, I think what I want to do is, rather than put this here, is you don't have to be optional anymore. And we'll just do where you're asking for source information provider. We're going to put you down there. Actually, you're obsolete, so I don't really care all that much. You know what? I don't care at all, actually. You're obsolete. I'm trying to get rid of you. So you need to be that or a new Visual Studio source information provider. Assembly file name and diagnostic message sync. You're actually testing assembly file name. And the argument in question is actually this. It's name of project assembly. And then this is xunit project assembly dot assembly file name. You're not allowed to be null. So that fixes everybody here. The guard here should be against assembly file name, which is fine. This is obsolete, I'm getting rid of it, so it doesn't matter that much. And then up here, now I want my to-do here. I need to find a way to be able to use Visual Studio source information provider. There's my to-do. Okay. So front controller for discovery and execution, your busto. Interestingly, because we want the project assembly, right? Two for discovery and execution project assembly, which we apparently did not stash. Source information provider and diagnostic message sync. Right. And then verify assemblies on disk, which we were apparently leaving as true by default. So what this means is we need an xunit project assembly. Project assembly. Which I like literally just recently removed. Was it here? Yeah, right that. Like that. And presumably we'll be able to get rid of a bunch of this split out stuff. Hmm. It's interesting that we don't think we can use Visual Studio Source Information Provider here. It's not available in Net Standard. So how am I using it over here? I'm not yet. I think I'm going to take this comment out. Okay. Alright, so we don't want you anymore. We want this. Like that. Alright. TNet runner helper. You don't have one of these yet. You have configuration. Interesting. You have configuration, but you don't have a... You take an assembly. Okay. So we need to construct one. Configurator load configuration from the assembly file name. Makes sense. So there's the assembly file name. So then we need... what was that thing called? The Axiom test project? What were you called? Project assembly. Okay. A new one of these. You need a project. So your project. So test assembly configuration is this. And you definitely need assembly. Assembly file name, configuration, which is just kind of stuffed in there, but we'll get that out. Target framework. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Assembly file name is assembly file name. Target framework. Think about how to get that. This doesn't have to be here anymore. Configurator load can now load this directly into the project assembly configuration. And then for discovery and execution, I want you to call why is there only one of them here? What? Well, this is front controller. Wait a minute, why would that be front controller? Oh, it's not. Okay, project assembly, source information provider, diagnostic message sync. So we have project assembly, and then the diagnostic message sync can just be the diagnostic message sync. And that's everything. So you shadow copy or default is probably false by default. that's it's not there. That must be here then. Shadow copy or default. I want to make sure that's false. Oh, see, now that's true. So let's make sure we set that then. Okay. This is starting to feel like a familiar pattern I'm not so awesomely happy about. Okay. Hmm. These are acceptance tests. So if I give you an assembly file name, we used to do some kind of an assembly load on that thing, didn't we? Off into the remote app domain. Interesting. Now that I think about this, executing project assembly requiring an assembly. Oh, let's see. Can't really require an assembly. How much stuff is going to break if I do that? Let's see. TNet runner helper set it. Inproc command line runner set it. Nobody else was setting it. Maybe null. Actually, into the current app domain. Let's say that. Okay. So I don't want to have to create assembly. All right. Just acceptance tests that are the problem, right? Project is a new X unit. Project. Project assembly is a new X unit. Project assembly. Project. The assembly file name is the assembly file name. The config file name is the config file name. Project assembly dot configuration shadow copy is shadow copy. Project assembly configuration app domain is app domain support. Project assembly diagnostic message sync. So there's app domain support, there's assembly file name, shadow copy. Those are the only things we care about. Okay. Alright, we have no idea whether these all ran last time. I guess they did. I'm not feeling 100% confident on these right now. These changes feel strange to me. Especially the fact that XUnit Project Assembly suddenly doesn't require an assembly. And nobody seems to freak out about that fact. So it was only the, whoops, that's not the one I wanted. It was only the inproc console runner that was setting it. Might actually have been the command line. It's interesting that we only have setters and we don't have any getters. I find that odd. Yeah, I find that odd. So command line took this assembly and stuffed it into XUnit Project Assembly that never gets used. That got called by the factory parse. You got called by this constructor. Here's the factory method. So there's the test assembly, which also gets stashed off here and probably used in other places. That's probably why nobody ever noticed that we weren't using it. Hmm. It's weird. Okay. Did rerun the build, right? Is it really done that fast? Honestly, I don't. I mean, I did. I definitely remember rerunning it. Maybe it was just done that fast. I guess I don't feel as weird about it now because I've determined that put this here for some reason that has not come to fruition yet. Okay, so our old factory method is now gone. Nobody's using this one. No references. We like that. So this is still a big chunk of parameters. Makes me wonder if what should be in here is an iAssembly info as opposed to just an assembly. Because that's really the difference between discovery is the assembly info versus the file on disk that we are sort of mandating. We're going to take this out, stop talking about this, the optional source information provider. I'm I'm also wondering how many of these things are actually required. So shadow copy folder, assembly info, we would obviously have to get from somewhere else. App domain support, config file name, all that stuff can come in through the XUnit project assembly. This is a weird one. Your execution assembly path. This is where did we find execution DLL. Which is really hard to do this if you're doing source-based discovery. The problem is we really want their execution DLL. We don't want to just put one in the box and use it when we don't know which one is theirs. Like we really need a pointer to that assembly. This is really going to be the crux of the problem with this factory system. I think I'm going to amend my last commit with these changes. And I think one of the things I'm going to do is take this factory method away that is currently not impling. So these definitely all ran. Let's make sure everybody still builds. So at the moment, the only thing XUnit File Controller can do is a for discovery and execution factory, which is fine. So we have the project assembly with the diagnostic message sync. We have source information provider. Which, when optional, we sort of figure it out. And we have a bunch of this stuff, which is pulled out of those values. Basically to make some of this other stuff easier. And actually, a lot of these things aren't even being used anymore. Which is kind of what I was hoping for. Perfect. Well, that simplifies it. This constructor now is just stash the values. Then this just-in-time creation of the inner controller, I think, is going to have to come down here into the factories. Because right now it's always an iFront controller, but it might not always be an iFront controller, right? Alright, so this is the discovery and execution. What if we say here that what I want really is an iFront controller? This is the inner controller. And we stash that away. What's interesting is this virtual is probably virtual, I was going to say for testing purposes, but actually not, because we don't, that is the funny part about this, is for unit testing purposes only, but like who? No, right? It's not true. And the fact this is virtual is also not true. Right, because the only reference is in this intercontroller accessor. So if you're not allowed to be null anymore, and we don't need you at all, so we want a disposal tracker, add the intercontroller. So these are all little I now. This logic needs to go somewhere else. These are little I, and little I. So you need a front controller. That's what you're missing. Now that comes from here. At the moment, I'm going to take you away, put you down here. So we're going to do this. Front controller going to be a default of front controller. So here we're going to say front controller is this. Otherwise we're going to do this. Alright, and then we're going to say front controller is this. Otherwise we're going to do this. So we're missing is a few parameters. That's fine. Front controller is this. And then for v3, we'll obviously have to update this. But this is the discovery and execution version of this. So we don't have XUnit 1 factories yet. If we had an XUnit 1 factory, it would literally only be for discovery and execution. There'd be no such thing as a for discovery version of this. Alright, so assembly file name is going to be project assembly file name. We're going to move this down here. We're just going to basically say if nobody ever came up with a front controller, then that's the logic we want to throw. So that's going to tell me that directory name can return null if the file name is null, right? Null if the path denotes a root directory or is null. Assembly folder is not equal to null, and we'll do all of this. That will also let us fall down into this logic. Now here we really want a factory for XUnit 1. I actually want to go add it right now. It'd be great if we could just, looks like we could probably just get away with this. Although, yep, looks like we could just get away with that. Factory methods, public, static. Front controller for discovery and execution. That's not exactly what I wanted to bring along, but we'll get there. The implementation of should be used to both discovery and execution of xunit.net v1 tests. You are just optional. That's all we're just going to say. Optional source information provider. Optional message sync, which receives diagnostic messages. All right, we need a guard here. Because it's required. And it's a public entry point. And let's make this internal. Actually, when it was public, how many references did it have? 3? Front controller and tests. That should be an easy fix, right? So you're internal now. We want... What am I listening to right now? Where are we? Okay. Let's see. New X unit 1, diagnostic message sync, project assembly, configuration, app domain or default, source information provider or null source information provider instance. What were we doing up here with that? We were not. We just assumed you gave us one. Okay. Which I think we want to do if net standard else which would be source information provider, new Visual Studio source information provider. Oh, sorry, this is backwards anyway. This is assembly file name, diagnostic message sync. We'll get there. And what's next? Assembly file name. Config file name, which comes from here. So it comes from there. And we need shadow copy, which is project assembly, configuration, shadow copy our default. Then we need shadow copy folder, which is project assembly, configuration, shadow copy folder. And then that's it. So then we have this. Project assembly, assembly file name. So we did this kind of a guard. Then diagnostic message sync can't be null. Really? Okay. Fine. Okay. That's our new factory method for X Unit 1. That means back here in front controller land, project assembly, source information provider, diagnostic message sync. Okay. Assembly folder does not exist in the current context. Oh, that's true. It doesn't exist here, does it? kind of want to do the guard here as well. Hmm. Can't really do a guard here because assembly folder is not strictly speaking required, nor is it a simply file name. I mean, it's required here, but not here. Hmm. Okay. Actually, I think I want to go with you're not allowed to be null here and deal with the null problem elsewhere, just like I did with XUnit 2. All right, deal with it down here. If not standard. Else. I suppose we can put that stuff up here, right? Which is if source information provider is null, if assembly file name is null, and source information provider is null, else source information provider is a new Visual Studio source information provider from the assembly file name, the diagnostic master sync. Do that. And then down here, we'll just do this. So none of these factories necessarily need to take nullable source information provider anymore. Although I think I still want to let them because they are still public endpoints. All right, testable XUnit 1. If I want to follow this pattern, this needs to be protected. It's not exactly strictly true that this is for unit testing purposes only, but factory methods and unit tests only. Okay. I'm okay with that. We got one red. Where's your one red? So you need don't care about the message sync. You don't care about app domains. Well, you do care about app domains. All right. So if our project is a new XUnit project, project assembly is a new XUnit project assembly. Project whose assembly file name is assembly.filename. And then we want to say project assembly configuration app domain. Is app domain support required? Project assembly. That's all we care about, right? Okay. Is that everybody? Everybody builds. That's a good sign. Let's go run some tests. Okay. That's all right. Yeah. Target framework question marks. I really need to sort of fix that. Or maybe we don't care. I mean, we kind of care. Target framework attributes. How many uses of that do we have? Hmm. Assembly utility, get target framework. That's exactly what I was looking for. And I'd like to figure out why anybody else is not using that. Assembly utility, get target framework, assembly file name. Okay, why aren't you doing this? Because you're based on attribute, custom attribute data? Your assembly info, which is iAssembly info. I still feel like I should be able to do this. Assembly utility? You have access to assembly utility? You don't even have access to it. Where is assembly utility? You're in runner common. So here's from assembly. This is from assembly model, assembly file name. This is where we use monocessel. Module definition read module. You're in core. Moving into v3 common. Well, then that brings the monocessel dependency into v3 common, which I'm not super psyched about. You're static, by the way. Okay, what's the last one? Test assembly runner, you're in the same boat. And you're doing constructor args. What if I bring an assembly utility into v3 common to do this? v3 core. Let's do that. So at least two places I can collapse down to one. All right. Public static string go. Test assembly, what are you? You're an iTest assembly. Or you're an iAssembly info. I think you both want iAssembly info. Assembly. Get target framework. First or default comes from link. All right. Who's the other user? The other user is this logic, which is a little bit better. A little bit better. Yeah, I'm not super psyched about that. We have in the other assembly utility, we have an unknown target framework. runner core, I think. Is that where you are? Runner common, sorry. And we'll just say note. So if we go change one or the other from XUnit v3 core, just so we know to go change them both. Okay. Now, you should be able to use assembly utility dot get target framework from assembly info. I'm like, why are you upset? Not really upset. You assembly utility get target framework. Test assembly assembly. Okay. Tests all passed. That's a good sign. Don't know if that's still going to be true. Did save everything, right? Yep, okay. All right, let's come back here and look again. So I like this. Right, because what I really want is I want a search for target, it was already there. Search for target framework attribute to be limited to assembly utility, assembly utility. The mocks. That's a mock target framework attribute. That's fine. You are in runner utility. You should not be doing this. Assembly utility get target framework for assembly info. So we'll go fix that one as well. Get target framework. My assembly info. Oh, you don't have iAssembly info because you're runner common. Ah. Where are all the references to this? Yeah, you need it. So I can't put it in runner utility. All right, well. Yeah, I can't get rid of that one. That's a one-time use that can't put into something else. All right. I think I've reduced as much duplication there as I can. Tests are over here running. That's good. Test assembly runner. Yep. Good. Project assembly. Is assembly really supposed to be required? Nobody uses it. This is actually static. Make a note of the other one. TNet runner helper. Got a target framework now. That's good. TNet runner helper. Okay, that all looks good. Xeno 1 tests. Yep. Everybody should use our little factory. Yup. Xeno front controller. Huge changes, yep. I got a factory method. Two constructors got collapsed into one, and then two factory methods. And there's our new assembly utility. Okay. So this is close to the message I want for all of this. Move front controllers to factory methods. So, from our factory method perspective now, XUnit1 has only a for discovery and execution, does not have a for discovery. That's okay. XUnit2 has a for discovery and for discovery and execution that both actually should do the right thing. And then XUnit front controller now also has for discovery and execution, but no discovery yet because we honestly don't know how to do it yet. So let's take a note. We did that. We did that. XUnit front controller for discovery needs a design which allows dynamic framework detection. Or maybe from discovery should just require them to say which framework it is. Or maybe support two options. One that's based on here's my test assembly, and one that's based on here's my reference list. Don't quite know what that's going to be yet. How long have we been going? 2.5 hours? Okay. We got stuff in here that apparently the front controller no longer needs. We no longer need either of those things, apparently. They were only ever used to construct the front controller. Which I guess means we weren't quite done here, were we? You give me a front controller. That certainly got easier, didn't it? I would like to call you inner controller and not front controller. Because that's what you are. This is pretty easy to anticipate here. Actually, what we can do is we can just say this inner controller. You are one of those. You are a discoverer. And disposal tracker can just cover that. You're actually inner discoverer. You're inner discoverer. And then here we basically say this instance of type of XUnit front controller full name is for discovery only. Inner controller. And that's how we guard, find, and run against being used in the wrong way. Okay. So now we have our constructors. We don't really need a disposal tracker if we're only ever disposing one thing, right? That's my belief. Inner discoverer dot dispose async. Okay. More time through with the tests. Front controllers are getting really, really simple. Just basically comes down to the search logic. It's all down here. We're going to need some way to show the search logic once we figure out what the discovery factory method is going to be. Sorry, dry throat. Okay. Okay. That looks okay. So there's for discovery and execution. Yep. I'm liking how this is simplifying it up a little bit. And we'll run through these tests one more time. Hmm. So, Visual Studio, env DTE, get assembly references. Project references. Information from assemblies in a current solution. A reference type assembly. Reference path. So you have reference path. So that looks like it'd be pretty easy to get from DTE to get paths. And frankly, if you just gave file names, that would be fine too. Question really is that note you're loading all these assemblies into dev env with reflection, meaning they're consuming memory and you cannot free this memory until dev env dies. Yeah, I really don't care about that part. Let's reference path. Monocessal. Hey, look at that. Won't load all the dependencies, and the get types throws reflection type load exception. Yeah. All right. So that seems. References and reference project interface and envdt. This is actually probably a good place to look. So project properties has where were you getting references from? Let's pop that up. Let's pop this up. Project object references reference. Yes, lang proj reference. Type. So an assembly reference or an ActiveX reference. So what is reference 6? It's the most advanced version of this. Has a type. Same thing. Path. What's not clear here is which of these things. So VS Lang Proj 150, that would be 2017. Reference path should be fine, right? You say 2015, but maybe 15 is 15. Although reference type, yeah, you say 1519, but not really. Yeah, 2017. Reference 6. Ref type? Maybe that's really what I want. Implements ref type. Are we just running backwards? There we go. Assembly com native. Okay. Even that is fine. Okay. That all seems okay. test cell ran. So I want to go ahead and amend that again. And then one more time, we figure out how we're going to do this. So what are our options? We wrote some notes. You're allowed to give me a test assembly, or you're allowed to give me a reference list. Trying to think about, I mean, I don't really know anything about the way ReSharper works in terms of a source-based reference list. Let's assume that we had that though, right? What would this look like? Front controller discover for discovery. At the very least, we need an IEnumerable of string, which is a reference list. So we don't necessarily need or want a project assembly. This feels, well, maybe. Maybe we do. But I think we need, for discovery, we definitely need an assembly info, which we don't have anywhere in project assembly. We had this, but I wonder if it should actually be an assembly info. And required. Because what does our constructor take, right? Our constructor for this... Oh, yeah, I don't want to look at that. I want to look at the XUnit2 factory method. XUnit2 for discovery. Right. You need a diagnostic message sync. Wow, how did I not fix that? Oh, that's right. We were talking about that earlier. I just never fixed it. Definitely requires an assembly info. So diagnostic message sync should definitely be optional. All right, which means you should come down here. Below source information provider. Actually, the reality is you guys should come down here. App domain support, we don't need. We need assembly info. Config file name can come into project. This XUnit execution assembly path. Path on disk of XUnit execution star.dll. If null, then it's implied. Yeah, we definitely need that. Shadow copy folder can come through the project. Problem is implementing an assembly info. Isn't... Yeah, I guess it is the responsibility of the runner. All right, so if we had a project assembly, we can get rid of a bunch of this stuff. Get rid of you, we get rid of you, we get rid of you. You move up. We need assembly info. Did I delete assembly info? No, it's right there. So assembly info, cut it up. Assembly info, project assembly, XUnit execution path, source information router, diagnostic, okay, verify, okay, that's all the parameters. Good. So app domain support, so we did this, just like last time. We're gonna do this. Config file name can just be project assembly dot config file name project assembly dot interesting thing about forcing shadow copy to be true is kind of a yeah, it's kind of a weird one, isn't it? All right. Sorry, where was I? This was what? Shadow copy folder. Configuration, shadow copy folder. Configuration, shadow copy folder. Bring in shadow copy. We know assembly file name is going to be null, and we brought in assembly info. Except if assembly file name is null, then how are you getting the execution path from this? Assembly info, assembly path. Hmm. There's some old school guards I'm not using name of. So we use this because we're using assembly info path. Why do we need app domain support there? Because supported platform suffixes based on app domain support. If you require app domains, you can only do desktop. Yeah, okay. So if this is our signature here, how much of that signature applies here? All right, so we've got assembly info. We need a project assembly. We're going to determine this. Those things can be optional. We don't do the verify stuff here. So if that's our list, let's go steal some params. So there's assembly. Project assembly, reference list. We're not doing you. We are doing you. We're not doing any of those. Okay, good. That's all those. Turns and implementation of front controller discoverer, which can be used to discover XUnit, to discover tests, including source-based discovery when supported. So we could use some guards, right? You can't be null. You can't be null. You can't be null. All right. So this stuff, we'll do that. We're going to do a lot of this kind of stuff, honestly. But it's not going to be exactly like this. We need an inner discoverer, assembly file name, and an assembly folder. Inner discoverer. U should be for discovery. Okay. Figure this out in a minute. So you need assembly, which apparently you should call assembly info, which I'm okay with. Assembly info. Project assembly, execution, execute execution path. We're definitely going to have that. Source information provider and diagnostic message sync. Let's do this. And then this. Suppose we could do it like this. Don't care about the assembly folder. I don't care about any of this. Can say if reference list any ref reference path.get file name without extension of reference Somewhere we had a list of supported whatevers. Let's say this. Path pattern is a regex. Unit execution. Star. Dot star. Can't remember which one's front and which one's this end. I could never remember that. Regex. Start of string. Start of line, yep. Okay. Path pattern match. Matches. Match is match. V2 path pattern. Then that's our inner discoverer. Nope. I'm going to do this. We need the first or default of this. First or default of this. V2 execution. Execution path. Could not find unit execution star DLL in reference list. Okay. I think that's right. And we have no idea how to do V3 yet. It's okay. Can't do source-based discovery for V1. Pretty sure. Right, because all these abstractions were part of V2. Introduced in V2. Note that xunit.net v1 does not support source-based discovery. Actually, I should be able to still do this same thing now. But only for .NET if .NET Framework. Only for .NET Framework. V2, V1, ref path is reference list, first or default, reference Path get file name of that extension in the reference is equal to xunit.dll. Actually, I don't actually need the path, right? I just need to know that it exists. Xunit 1 for discovery and execution. So here we go with our Alright, so the full path names of all referenced assemblies. Search for references using Xunit.net reference assemblies. Determine which version of xunit.net the tests were written against. And that makes a discoverer version of the front controller. Okay. That seems like it should be the thing we need. Fortunately, with a lot of this stuff, we won't really know what works and what doesn't work until we start integrating in with a Visual Studio Runner, which we can't really do until we start generating NuGet packages. So a lot of this is going to be sort of theoretical until we can get a consumer. All right. And I think this should also be rolled into that last change. All right, because now we've got for discovery. Okay, so we've answered this. What we haven't answered is, should XUnit project assembly include iAssembly info? Currently only require it for discovery and then just for source-based discovery. So it might be an undue burden for any project, for any runner which is not doing source-based discovery. Could also potentially manufacture it from a non-null assembly reference. Assembly file name. Actually, that kind of makes me want to do it. I was like, you don't have to set it. Yeah, that kind of makes me want to do it. But I'm not going to do it right now. This would also be able to simplify the for discovery factory methods for front controllers. Okay. We did build all this already, right? Yep. Go ahead and run these tests. Front controller, wow, those things are not sorted correctly. Why are you not sorted correctly? Because of this, probably. I mean, in theory, I could move it up there, but I don't like it up there. Fix import ordering. I think I just did that, actually. Now that I look at the error. Now the .NET format doesn't require a solution file. I feel like I want to get at least a rudimentary GitHub PR check. Okay, looking good. Go ahead and push that up. I'm going to call that a pretty good day's work. Yep, we've been running, about 3 hours. So, kind of got what I wanted done. Uh, architecture changes, design changes. It's probably going to need to sit for a little bit get my brain and stew around and make sure that I'm sort of comfortable with where everything ended up. But it seems okay for the moment. So there you go. Anyway, thanks for hanging out today, and I'll see you next time.